I would like to warmly welcome all of you to the inaugural Chiedu Osakwe Memorial Lecture. My name is Maiko Shikawa, Director of the Accession Divisions. So this is a division where Chiedu, as a former director, spent last 8 years of his career in the Secretariat before leaving for Nigeria in 2016. If you tuned into this event online or in person, it means that you either know Chiedu personally, or heard of him, or his work, or you're simply interested in the topic of this lecture. No matter the reason, your presence today is a testimony to Chiedu's lifelong professional accomplishment and the impact he had on many people. What is also true is Chiedu always brought people together, whether for brainstorming, debate, or solution of a political or technical nature, or simply to have a good time, or drinks, and of course cigar in his office after serious negotiating sessions, summer barbecues in his garden. And there was, of course, always there was lots of champagne, right? What is true today is I think Chiedu continued to bring us together, even after his passing. So indeed, as an organizer of this event, we were really overwhelmed by the huge and positive responses from around the world in this lecture in him. And when we decided to start this lecture series in his memory and his honor. So in this regard, I'm most grateful for the support of Chiedu's family, and for today, especially at the presence of his wife, Ime, and Agnese, his daughter, and then other family members who are connected online. As I was speaking to Ime last night, we agreed that the Chiedu must be sort of, watching us with a big smile and while sipping his champagne. For today's inaugural lecture, we are really very honored to have His Excellency Wamukele Mene, who is of course one of Chiedu's many of the good friends, and now heads AfCFTA Secretariat. Wamukele has brought also his colleagues from Accra, and including some of you, I think, have worked with Chiedu. So at the different times. I'm also very pleased to have with us Dr. Bright Okugu, Chief of Staff to the WTO Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, as she could not make herself available today as she's traveling. But I do hope that she will make it to the next one. For me, it is, of course, was always Chiedu. I heard about Dr. Ngozi for the first time, long time ago, many years ago. They have been friends. I was told they have been very good friends, and they even contributed to a book together on something on challenges of Nigeria. Chiedu said to me at that time, there was a great Nigerian lady, right? And they talked a lot about him. And of course now, Dr. Ngozi is heading this institution. I would say very much Chiedu-like energy. So this also sort of reminded me over the 20 years I had known him. I met him when I was an intern, very young, in this building. I always felt he knew everything, and that he knew everything ahead of times, and more than anybody else. So I had always turned to him for any advice, guidance, whether it's on professional matter or personal matters, as my mentor and boss, friends and colleague, and I very much miss him for that. And I know many of you feel the same way. And I'm forever grateful for what he had told me and guided me, as I think they have very much shaped me who I am today as a professional. And what is most striking influence he had on me, and then probably many of you, is that something also, it has also become very clear after his passing, It's Chiedu's incredible ability to make you believe in yourself and your ability to make a difference. So for me, this is his lasting legacy. So a few words before I give the floor to Dr. Bright on today's topic, today's lecture, AfCFTA and the WTO, shaping the future of multilateral trading system. As you know, Chiedu was a very strong believer in the WTO and of course in AfCFTA, having been part of their respective bus at the times that many were not sure whether they're going to succeed. So since these two topics were very much, I would say, his babies, we thought this topic, how WTO and Africa will be shaping the future of multilateral trading system, would have been his sort of pet project of the day. And as you know, Chiedu engineered many projects in this house, which we found his name in their root. So with this short introduction, it is now my big pleasure to invite Dr. Bright to deliver opening statement on behalf of the Director General. Dr. Bright, you have the floor.
I'm going to take off my mask with your permission. I'm fully vaccinated and tested PCR a few times already in the last 2 weeks. There's an earpiece here that we use normally in this room because the acoustics are set up. So in case you need to take one, it's just right there in front of you, and to tune to the right channel and language and so on. Your Excellency, Ambassador Wamkele Menon, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Mrs. Imebong Osakwe, and the entire Osakwe family, both here physically and those who are joining us virtually. You are warmly welcome. Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, I see the Nigerian ambassador here, and we're indeed very happy that you were able to make it personally. Other ambassadors who are present here, you are very welcome. I see the Deputy Director General, Zhang, who is also here with us kindly. Thank you very much for being here personally to witness this particular event. I should also say that the SG came with a delegation from Accra, and I welcome all of you. And thank you for making time to be here with us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Director General of the WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I want to formally welcome you to this memorial lecture in honor of Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe, who departed this world about 2 years ago. The words that I speak here are mine, rather than Dr. Ngozi's words. But I know that the sentiments expressed in these few words would be something that she too will identify with very, very well. She really would have liked to be here, but she's currently in the US for all the international meetings that are going on at the moment. Before going any further, let me thank the former colleagues and friends of Ambassador Osakwe for organizing this particular event, that the accession division of the World Trade Organization, and you already heard Ms. Oshikawa. I think I want to give her a sort of formal, rather than just say Maika. she worked tirelessly on this in preparing this. And in the presence of all of you, I want to thank her and her colleagues. Thank you very much. I want to say something here, which she said to me as we were looking at all this, preparing this in the last couple of weeks. She said that she described the late Ambassador Osakwe as a boss, a mentor, and a friend, apart from being a colleague. I think she repeated some of that just now, and I wanted to put it on record that she had said this to me in private in our meetings, and she's repeated it today. I think that tells you a little bit about the nature of the man that we are celebrating today. I should say something that this event we are having here is a very unusual event for the WTO. To honor a colleague or a person who left this place a few years ago and passed on subsequently, it is not very common. I did make some inquiry, asked some people, and everybody that I spoke to felt that this was a well-deserved honor, and that this event, even though it's uncommon or usual, is something well-deserved. And that was very heartening to me to hear about. I want to say that I personally never met Ambassador Osakwe in his lifetime, but I knew about him and I was aware of his work. During the time that they were negotiating and discussing the foundational document for the African Continental Free Trade Area, I was very much aware. I was following what was going on because I was executive director at the African Development Bank, subsequently became dean of that board for 2 years. So I was following fully the developments, negotiations, and the discussions with respect to the AfCFTA, which resulted in our supporting, our discussing the proposal, and eventually approving some grant to enable the AfCFTA to take off. So this event of today, celebrating the work of Ambassador Osakwe, is something that I fully identify with, because even though we never met, I knew about him and I knew some of the work and the things that he was doing. To the lovely family of Ambassador Osakwe, his wife, his children, I want to express my sincere condolences, even though it's 2 years now, and also to encourage you to take pride in his legacy. That is all that humans can really do under such circumstances. As far as I am concerned, there's never really a good time to lose a loved one. A beloved person stays in your heart. There's never, even if the person were to live to be 100 years old, there's never a good time to lose a beloved person. In such times, however, we do take and we recall the words from Ecclesiastes in the Bible. Chapter 3, which first 2 paragraphs basically say, 2 verses say, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. This statement, thousands of years old, continues to be relevant in the lives of every human being that passes through the earth. May his soul rest in peace, and may God comfort the family he's left behind. All of those people who loved him in life are now mourn his passing. We pray for God's comfort for all of them. This event honors a man who was a fierce champion of the multilateral trading system and the power of that particular multilateralism to transform the economies of countries, including, of course, Africa. Ambassador Osakwe was a true believer, having dedicated a large part of his professional life to this place, this institution. First, as a Nigerian delegate to GATT so many years ago, at the end of the Uruguay round, and the early days of the World Trade Organization when it came into existence. I eventually switched to the Secretariat, where, as Ms. Maika said earlier, he played very critical roles, occupying different senior positions in this organization. Some of them were mentioned earlier: head of International Agency Working Group for the Integrated Framework for LDCs, Director of the Technical Cooperation, and so on and so forth. These are all well recognized and documented in the WTO. In 2016, Ambassador Osakwe was asked to return to Nigeria, where he served as the first Director General of the Nigerian Office of Trade Negotiations and Chief Trade Negotiator for the country. Among many long-standing contributions which Ambassador Osakwe made was the historic conclusion of the Agreement Establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, which we've spoken about in passing, one way or the other, even in this place, in meetings that we've had opportunities to do this. He passed away about 2 years ago. And as was introduced by Micah earlier, this was a big shock to most people, to everybody who knew him, even people who did not know him very well, but heard about the passing from a distance, who knew him from a distance, also found it to be a shock. Ambassador Osakwe understood fully the value of having an economically integrated African continent within the multilateral trading system, which was why he devoted a major part of his career to this. Let me just mention that Africa, the trade within Africa, intra-Africa trade, is only about 16%. The rest is with the rest of the world. And you know the implication that that carries, because everybody is exporting almost the same raw materials to other continents. Not much value is added. The trade, the AfCFTA will change that. Some of the estimates by the World Bank and others include it's going to add $400 billion to the economy of the continent within a few years, 20 million people to be lifted out of poverty, and so on and so forth. So they are positive. What we now need to do is to actualize these potentials that we all see and we see very clearly. The AfCFTA is the largest trading area as far as the world is concerned today. All the 54, 55 African countries with a combined population of 1.25 billion people and a combined GDP of about $2.5 trillion. All of these things, they represent the potential we are talking about. We are now seeking to translate that potential into reality. You cannot eat potential. Potential needs to be materialized. And that is what we believe that this particular trading area will do for Africans. And also to acknowledge the role that Chiedu played in bringing this about, alongside many other people, including His Excellency, who will be speaking to us in a short time. A strong Africa, stronger Africa means a stronger multilateral trading system, because you can come in as a bloc, just like the European Union currently does. And that gives you a bargaining power that has been missing for a very long time. We know the issues of the COVID-19 and all the discussions surrounding it. A strong and powerful trading bloc of the African continent, 1.25 billion people, will have a stronger voice. And we thank both the ambassador, late Ambassador Osakwe, and all those who worked with him, as well as leave things in the hands of the incoming, those carrying the torch forward, including, of course, the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, who is with us here. Up to this point, the WTO has supported different aspects and phases of the AfCFTA, negotiations through training, experience sharing, research activities, and so on. This we will continue to do. I believe that this lecture will provide a unique opportunity to think outside the box and discover what we can do more in order to strengthen the relationship on both sides. Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe, if you were listening, if you were here, would be very glad to see what has been set up and been done today in his honor. Finally, let me simply say that there's hardly a better person to speak on the topic of today. Hardly a better person than His Excellency Wamkele Mene, because he's now having that responsibility to take the African free trade area to the next level. He is a man with a vast experience. He's not a stranger to the WTO. He served in the South African mission to the WTO from 2010 to 2015 and worked on WTO issues at the Department of Trade and Industry in his country for many years. Mr. Mene and Ambassador Osakwe worked very closely together in crafting the AfCFTA and finalizing some of the final points before it was concluded. It is therefore my great honor and pleasure to invite His Excellency to join, to basically speak and address to this gathering. And we're all looking forward to hearing what he has to say and the mandate and the plans that he has to take this things forward. Thank you very much, and I welcome again all of you, and thank you for being part of this event. Again, to the family of the late Ambassador Osakwe, you're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bright. I think with this, I would like to invite Wamukele, Secretary General of AfCFTA Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Micah. I will join Dr. Akogu in taking off my mask, if you don't mind. I've also been vaccinated, and I've also had about 145 COVID tests, so I think I'm okay. I want to first acknowledge the Osakwe family, their presence here today. I want to also acknowledge His Excellency, the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Excellencies, the ambassadors who are here today, friends and colleagues. It really is a pleasure for me to be here with my colleagues from Accra. I've come with Demeter Gyang, who used to work very closely also with Ambassador Osakwe when he returned to Nigeria in 2016, 2017. Let me start by thanking the DG, Madam DG Okonjo-Iweala, for initiating this lecture. And as the Chief of Staff was saying, this is the first of its kind for an African to be honored in a memorial lecture series in the way in which we are about to do. And in this regard, I want to appreciate your efforts, Micah, for keeping the legacy of Ambassador Osakwe alive and for making sure that we continue to honor him yearly going forward. We pay tribute to a phenomenal and a marvelous man, a dear brother to me, and a close friend. A distinguished man after whom this lecture is now named, and as I've just said, which will memorialize him in lecture series to come. He was the model public servant, a quintessential diplomat, champion of the multilateral trading system, and above all, a marvelous human being. Whether you liked him or not, and I happen to have liked him, and whether you disagreed with him or not, and I had many policy and tactical disagreements with him over beautiful South African red wine, I can confidently assert that knowing that he was indeed a marvelous man, and knowing that nobody will disagree with me when I say that he was by far one of the best trade policy minds of his generation that our continent has produced. Ambassador Osakwe was easily one of the most outstanding and dedicated supporters of the multilateral trading system and of its embodiment in the WTO. But at the same time, he was probably its largest critic in a very, very constructive way. It is therefore befitting that we honor him in this way today. And I'm very humbled and singularly honored to deliver this inaugural public lecture in honor of one of the WTO's most committed stalwarts, most gifted stalwarts, exactly 2 years since his passing. Today, we look back at the fuel that drove Ambassador Osakwe's commitment to service in what was a stellar career spanning the WTO and Nigeria. But we also look to the future. We look to the legacy that he left behind. We look to the AfCFTA, seeking answers to that penultimate question of how to preserve his legacy, especially in relation to the future of trade in the African continent. Those of us who worked closely with him here at the WTO and later in his life when we were negotiating the AfCFTA have a brotherly duty, in my view, to do all that we can to advance his ideals of the multilateral trading system. The memorial lectures, this being the first of the series, should also offer an opportunity for intellectuals, academics, policymakers to come together and engage in constructive debates to shape the future of the multilateral trading system. Ambassador Osakwe was not only passionate about the multilateral trading system, he believed in it, he defended it, and as I've just said, he provided a critique of it also. Almost like an ethos, a creed, he was completely sold to the notion that the world has a force for good in the WTO. And later, when we started negotiating the AfCFTA, he equally believed that it was a force for good for Africa. Those of us that had the privilege to interact very closely with him can attest to the passion with which he navigated discourse here at the WTO. I therefore view this occasion as a celebration of his life, deeds, and legacy of one of the most illustrious trade policy minds that our continent has produced. He was a personal friend, a dear brother, and I believe, like to many of you in this room and beyond, he touched you in a way that will remain with you for the rest of your lives. He was an inspiring advocate for the multilateral trading system, that it should work for all, and that it should work particularly for the most vulnerable countries. In his own words, and I quote, "Of all the possible options, the rules-based liberal market order with a development dimension is the best. The elasticity of such an order should accommodate all who want to remain part of the system, end quote. He was committed to safeguarding and strengthening the multilateral trading system, both in his work at the WTO and earlier on as a trade diplomat for Nigeria, where he spent the early and latter parts of his career. As you heard, he had several senior positions in the WTO and later was recruited by the highest office in Nigeria to start the Office of Nigerian Trade Negotiations. But what was particularly remarkable to me was his work, as Micah said, when he was director of sections. We saw the WTO membership expand. We saw the WTO's quest for universality gain traction and speed, both in scale and breadth, under his leadership. We saw Montenegro, Samoa, the Russian Federation, and Vanuatu in 2012, Laos, Tajikistan in 2013, Yemen in 2014, Seychelles and Kazakhstan in 2015, and Liberia and Afghanistan in 2016. Ambassador Osakwe was relentless in pursuing the objective of universality of the WTO. And I believe he achieved success in this regard, in part due to his deep knowledge of the rules-based system, but more importantly, due to his determination to broaden the membership of the WTO, to make it more representative and to make it more inclusive of the peoples of the world. We all know what happened, and we remember in Hong Kong, the challenges of negotiating the text, the declaration, where we committed that we shall deal with and solve the issue of cotton ambitiously, expeditiously, and specifically. These words involve the propositions and alternatives that Ambassador Osakwe himself brokered in Hong Kong, bringing a very strong development dimension to the heart of the DDA negotiations in Hong Kong. And I remember in one of the negotiation sessions here at the WTO in 2013, I said that we had agreed in Hong Kong that we would solve the cotton issue ambitiously, expeditiously, and specifically. And after the meeting, he said to me, "Do you know that you were quoting my words from Hong Kong?" I said, "Ambassador, I didn't know that." He said, "Well, next time, credit me for using my words." He published extensively, as we all know, a number of books. And again, let me remember what he said to a delegate in one of the negotiating sessions when he was the chairman of the senior trade officials. And those of us who know him and his family, I'm sure, know that he did not suffer fools easily. He did not have patience for stupidity and laziness. And there was a delegate who happened to have asked a question that he should have known better. And when this delegate, a senior trade official, asked this question, Ambassador Osakwe took off his glasses and said, "My dear brother, please, I've written 2 books on this matter. Go and read my books, come back, and then ask questions. But don't ask questions that are already addressed in my book." And of course, it was not a statement of arrogance. It was a statement exhibiting deep knowledge for the subject matter. He firmly had the conviction that trade can play a critical role in transforming the prospects of Africa, and in particular, to defeat poverty on our continent. He believed that the value of trade is grossly misunderstood and underestimated by many countries around the world, and that enhanced trade, particularly in our continent, would serve as a driver for prosperity. His historical contribution in chairing the senior trade officials of the AfCFTA from June 2017 to March 2018 led to the timely conclusion of the agreement establishing the AfCFTA and leaves a lasting legacy for the future of trade policy on the African continent. As you know, he steered the negotiations to a successful conclusion, culminating in the signing of the AfCFTA by 44 countries in March 2018. With his dynamism, negotiating and political skills, deep knowledge and outstanding diplomatic acumen, and above all, the ability to see through very, very difficult and complex negotiating and contradictory positions, we were able to succeed. We can now proudly say that we negotiated an agreement in less than 5 years, very comprehensive trade agreement with a depth of ambition that includes today 40 countries in Africa have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA, and 54 countries out of 55 have signed the agreement. I think this demonstrates to me his capacity to deliver and achieve results, but it also demonstrates his capacity to learn from his own mistakes and from the mistakes and learn from others. I mention this because Nigeria, of course, did not sign the agreement in 2018. And let me tell you the conversation that him and I had. In one of the sessions, after one of the sessions, I said to him in late 2017, it was in Abuja, I said, Ambassador, you are driving us too fast. We need to have time for consultations at home. He said to me, no. We have a very firm deadline. We cannot delay for national consultations. In March 2018, I think it was around the 17th and 19th of March, we had been negotiating for 4 weeks in Rwanda, in Kigali. And on the day of signature, the day that the heads of states were supposed to arrive, Ambassador Osakwe left. And so I called him, I said, where are you? He said, no, we have been instructed not to sign the agreement. So we are leaving. I said, why? He said, you remember what you told me about consultations? I said, no, I don't remember. He said, well, you had cautioned me in Abuja that we must leave time for consultations. And he said, the mistake that I made is that I did not consult properly and I did not heed your caution. He was, of course, more senior than me, both in terms of years and professional experience, but he was willing to learn from the mistake that he made. And as a result, him and Demeter toured the whole of Nigeria, covered all of the states of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, undertaking extensive consultations. And I think that during this period, it is during this period that his illness set in the most, because it was a very, very exhausting, almost 1 year of non-stop travel, non-stop consultations. So to me, this demonstrates the commitment, the capacity to learn, capacity to admit mistakes, and capacity to learn from those who are younger than him. I last saw him on the 6th of July in Niamey at the summit. And we all remember the iconic photographs that were taken of him, 2 photographs that are really iconic. With him standing behind President Buhari, looking very frail, but very determined. And so that day, him and I had lunch after Nigeria signed the agreement. I congratulated him for the signature. And I must repeat what I said at his memorial service in Abuja. I must repeat that it's it's remarkable to see a human being confronting the hour of his death, but at the same time, remaining committed to his public service and to his sense of duty. That was the last time I saw him. I then, of course, I spoke to him a few days later, and I decided that let me give him some space. And I later was told that he passed on. Now, where does that leave us in the WTO and in the AfCFTA? I think we have a particular responsibility to continue his legacy. I think we have a duty to do so, because we have a human being who laid down his life for what he believed in, and to strengthen the multilateral trading system. And the challenge, of course, is, and this is something that we always talked about, him and I, how do we get this multilateral trading system to translate into jobs, poverty alleviation, and improving people's lives, particularly on the African continent? So I want to make a direct link between what he was able to achieve and what the AfCFTA has been able to achieve in a very, very short space of time. You don't know this, but I will share it with you. It was not my idea to become Secretary General. It was his idea. Demeter knows this, that when we were discussing what do we have a secretariat, do we have a director general, do we have a secretary general, he raised the flag of Nigeria and said, we shall have a secretary general, and I know the person who shall become the secretary general. And of course, with that voice of authority, it had to happen exactly that way. And it did. Now, what are the observations that we can make between the AfCFTA and the WTO? Today's theme is shaping the AfCFTA, shaping the future of the multilateral trading system. Very, very timely because of the challenges that all of us know. The backlash against trade agreements, the rejection of globalization, the legitimate criticisms that there are others who are being left behind by trade agreements. All of these are very, very common challenges between the WTO and us in the AfCFTA Secretariat. There was a Donald Trump And the Donald Trump happened in the United States in part because of the idea that he was able to embed that trade agreements work only for a select few, that the WTO delivers only for a select few countries and that we must get out of it. And that trade agreements, NAFTA in particular, ships jobs off to Mexico. We are losing against China because of trade agreements. Of course, this was a very, very artificial analysis to be expected, but I don't think anybody can deny that it did resonate. In other parts of Europe, it resonated in a more sophisticated way. We saw an emergence of right-wing fascist fundamentalism that also rejected globalization and also rejected free trade agreements and also said, let's reject the WTO. So we had this convergence of right-wing fundamentalism that really we must critique what was the cause of the multilateral trading system. Did it contribute to this rise in right-wing fundamentalism and fascism and rejection of globalization and rejection of free trade agreements? My view, my humble view, and this is something that Chiedu and I discussed many, many times, as I've said, over red wine and cigars. My view is that it is because of lack of inclusivity. If in the AfCFTA, we do not have implementation that is inclusive, if the benefits go only to the big countries in Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, South Africa, Kenya, we're not going to succeed. If we leave behind very important segments of our society, women in trade, young entrepreneurs, women who are trading on the borders, who are the drivers of a 60% contribution to Africa's GDP, if the agreement benefits only my friends at MTN or Zenith Bank or Equity Bank, we're not going to succeed. And in fact, we would be incubating a Donald Trump in Africa. I say this because this, in my view, is what distinguishes, without critique or criticism of anybody else or any other trade agreement, but this is what distinguishes the AfCFTA. So we sat in Abuja for 3 weeks and we said to ourselves, what lessons can we learn from what has gone wrong around trade agreements in the world? Inclusivity is one of them, I've just mentioned it. Placing important segments of our society at the center of economic development. Promoting industrial development and making sure that the trade rules that we design facilitate, promote, and fast-track industrial development on the African continent. I have not seen another trade agreement that specifically creates an obligation, establishes an obligation for industrial development and the establishment of regional value chains. Yes, we can talk about the practicality of that. The idea is that we accepted that we cannot be a free trade area that focuses only on trade and only on market access and neglect the development dimension that here in the WTO, we have been calling for many, many years. And so we have a particular responsibility in the AfCFTA to make sure that this development dimension is translated and codified into law, into trade law. That is why we have a provision on industrial development. That is why we're going to have a protocol on women in trade and young people in trade. And that is why we are designing frameworks to ensure that there is inclusivity of benefits across the African continent. To do this, we're taking practical steps. We're mobilizing over $1 billion, we're mobilizing over $1 billion from our strategic partner, Afrexim Bank, for an AfCFTA fund to make sure that this fund invests in productive sectors in Africa, so that as you liberalize and reduce and eliminate tariffs, where you have a shortfall because of reductions in tariffs, that there is a cushion and an adjustment facility available. But it's not going to be budget support. It is intended for productive sector to facilitate industrialization in Africa. It is directly linked to the obligations of the agreement, to the tariff phase down, to the non-tariff barriers elimination. This is the development that we want to see on our continent. We're not just reducing tariffs and eliminating tariffs. We want to make sure that we support that with concrete action. We're also looking at practical steps for including, as I said, very, very important segments of our society. Women in trade, young entrepreneurs. We are developing the Africa Trade Gateway, which is a digital platform that is primarily aimed at small, medium enterprises who want to trade under the AfCFTA. You will be able to log on to the platform. You'll be able to access the market. If you are in West Africa, you'll be able to access the market in East Africa. You will have due diligence information about your counterparty that you are entering into a trade transaction with. And more importantly, you will be able to trade in your local currency based on this digital platform. We have over 42 currencies on the African continent. Currency convertibility costs us over $5 billion per year. We believe that through this payments platform and payment system, we will now make trade in Africa more efficient, more affordable, and of course, more accessible to small, medium enterprises. This is how we make a trade agreement relevant and sustainable, by making sure that it has a very, very strong development dimension that actually touches people's lives and is not just a text that we put in my office, having been nicely bound. And so these are some of the steps that I believe we have to take to avoid the backlash that I referred to earlier, to make the multilateral trading system even more relevant. If we have a product and we load it into this digital platform, made in the AfCFTA, you've met the rules of origin. When you as a small medium enterprise are transacting in this AfCFTA platform, you are actually making the trade agreement relevant to your life. So we have, I think, a degree of, we have a right to be self-congratulatory as Africans, because I believe we have been more than innovative in how we address some of these challenges that in other parts of the world, we see this sloganeering about how we solve very complex economic problems and challenges of our world. We know, of course, that right-wing fundamentalism embedded in it is to sloganeer and to pretend that difficult challenges can be overcome by using a slogan. And so we've done the opposite. We have not said as Africa that you are shipping jobs to the rest of the world. We have not said that you are cheating us in global trade. What we've said is that we have been in this condition for the last 60 years. What do we do? As Dr. Okoku said, we have a market of 1.3 billion people, fragmented market, smallness of national economies, lack of competitiveness, lack of industrial capacity, and all of this leads to the 16% intra-Africa trade that Dr. Okoku referred to. But in the wisdom of our heads of states, we are now no longer just lamenting this condition. We're not just saying we've been in this situation of exporting raw materials, primary commodities for the last 60 years to developed countries, which is why we continue to be trapped in this colonial economic model. We've gone beyond that. And so whilst in the last 2-3 years, whilst the rest of the world was becoming even more protectionist in trade, we are engaging in liberalization of trade in Africa. And so whilst the rest of the world is putting up barriers to investment, we are reducing these barriers to investment. We actually have been probably the best friend to the WTO in the last 5 years. The AfCFTA has been the best friend to the WTO in the last 5 years. Because what we have done, based on WTO rules, is to consolidate amongst 55 countries, consolidate WTO rules, improve on WTO rules, where there is a need for improvement. And we've created a constituency of countries that will now regulate their trade in accordance with WTO rules. We discussed with Ambassador Osakwe intellectual property rights. This was, of course, before COVID-19. But I believe what we discussed back then in Addis Ababa in 2016, incidentally, in 2017, incidentally, on his birthday, what we discussed was how do we make intellectual property rights, how do we make intellectual property rights to be at the service of Africa's public health imperatives? And so all of the things that we tried to do in paragraph 6, TRIPS flexibilities and so on, which unfortunately we did not succeed, not because of lack of trying, but because we all know the negotiating system. So we now have an opportunity as Africa to have an intellectual property rights regime that is going to be far-reaching, that will be at Africa's, that will serve Africa's public health imperatives, that will also, secondly, drive Africa's industrialization. We must make sure that we have an intellectual property rights regime that is sufficiently flexible to enable the production of generic drugs in Africa. Today, we're talking about manufacturing of vaccines. And I can assure you, I was a troublemaker here in the WTO. I didn't succeed. But I am now in a position to succeed to be a troublemaker. We are going to have an intellectual property rights regime that will place Africa's public health at the center. Yes, the right holders will complain, we will talk to them. But I think if we are to learn from this pandemic as a continent, we had a situation where we were importing these masks, germ-killing products, and other pharmaceutical products in 2019, up to $15 billion that we imported, over-reliant on the supply chain that takes us elsewhere. And so I believe that we require an intellectual property rights framework and regime, which we shall have, that will serve this dual purpose of advancing Africa's public health imperatives. Today, we have some countries in Europe and in North America that have 5 times more vaccines that they need for their populations, 5 times more. When on the African continent, less than 3 billion people have been fully vaccinated. And so you can see the relevance of an intellectual property rights regime that is at the service of public health of Africa. And I know that if Ambassador Osakwe was alive today, that him and I would be championing this particular cause. So we want to serve this dual purpose of industrialization, establishment of the generic drug industry in Africa, as well as being at the service of Africa's public health imperatives. What we've also been able to achieve is, of course, in the area of dispute settlement. We now have a fully operational dispute settlement mechanism. We have established an appellate body that will comprise, as you know, the Court of Final Instance, an appellate body that will comprise some of the brightest and the best minds in Africa. And more importantly, we have established an appellate body system that will avoid mistakes that we have made elsewhere. In our system, not a single country will be able to veto appointment of an appellate body member. So we've learned from across the board, and we've learned that in order to make mistakes, in order to avoid making mistakes, inclusivity, ensuring that the trade agreement is relevant to the most vulnerable segments of society, and moving away from legalese, trade legalese that really has no relevance to people's lives. That's how you make a multilateral trading system sustainable for the future and relevant. We, of course, had our challenges. We continue to face these challenges. I happened to be there from the very beginning of the negotiations of the AfCFTA in 2012 in Ghana, when we established the Boosting Intra-Africa Trade Action Plan. We identified Africa's industrial development deficit as a big challenge. And as I mentioned earlier, we are taking concrete steps to address that. We will have challenges related to capacity to implement the agreement. Countries in Africa at different stages of institutional capacity, the strength. We will have challenges in relation to trade remedies. As we know, only South Africa and Egypt in Africa have fully functional trade remedies authorities. There are some others that have been recently established. We will have challenges in relation to customs procedures, rules of origin. The implementation of rules of origin will be a challenge. All of these technical things we will have to confront. But in every country that I go to, every head of state that I meet, that I talk to, even those that have not yet ratified, they all tell me the same thing. Secretary General, I may not have ratified, but I am fully committed to implement the agreement when the Parliament is ready, when the private sector is ready. I think what has sustained us is the engagement at the highest level. I report twice to heads of states. I will do so again in October, November. The highest political office in Africa is fully engaged on this in making sure that this trade agreement succeeds and that the projections that Dr. Okogu was talking about become a reality. And I don't think we have seen this type of political will previously. Previously, our summits, correctly so, focused on peace and security issues. But now, the heads of states twice a year, they receive reports on progress in the AfCFTA. They make specific interventions where there is a need to do so. And so this high-level engagement is in part why we made progress in such a short space of time, because heads of states are fully engaged and they follow what is happening. And that is the last time I saw my dear brother was in a closed session of the Assembly of Heads of States in Niamey in 2019. Let me conclude by saying this. I was in South Africa and the gentleman said to me, a well-known investor, he said to me, well, I admire your naivety about Africa's capacity to get things done. It is not going to happen. We've seen this movie before. Africa has had many, many initiatives before. But traveling across Africa, what I have sensed is that Africans realize that we're not going to be saved by somebody else. And quite frankly, we don't want that. The answer to our challenges, to our development challenges, lies within us. No one is going to industrialize our continent for us. We know that we have to do it ourselves. And that is why I am encouraged. I said to this investor, I am encouraged because I hear the heads of states. I meet with them, often on one-on-one, and I hear the commitment that they have to this. Nigeria did not sign because Nigeria is committed to listening, at that time, to listening to the private sector. And that is what is actually happening across the continent. We go across the continent to listen to the private sector and important segments of our society. So I believe we will succeed. And what is going to anchor the success of this agreement is driving Africa's industrialization. Now we know, and I've said this before, industrialization is not a pill that you swallow, you wake up the next day, you've industrialized. It's going to take decade after decade of disciplined implementation of an industrial action plan. But I believe we've taken a very, very important first step. We will have to be patient. We know that today, it is exactly this year, 72 years since Europe has embarked on market integration. Very, very successful model of market integration by some accounts. And so we must expect that it is going to take time. That is why I must confess I was slightly irritated when a European journalist asked me in June. He said, Secretary General, you declared that you are trading from the 1st of January 2021. Please tell us where are the schedules of tariff concessions. I said, 71 years ago. Who asked Europe when they had just embarked on their own integration project? Who asked Europe at that point, where are the schedules of tariff concessions? So I said to him, let's be intellectually honest about the difficulties and the challenges of integration, and let us confront the reality that it is going to be extremely difficult to integrate a market of 55 countries, differentials in levels of development, differentials in industrial development capacity. It's going to be a very, very difficult commitment. But as I've said, we have the capacity, we have the determination. What we do not have is Chiedu Osakwe to help us to achieve these objectives. And so I want to thank you very much for listening to me, for the opportunity to talk about this very, very important man who laid down his life to make a contribution to Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this. It was a really rich lecture, talked about the person we deeply care that brought us together here. And all the lesson, your experience in the continent, but bringing back your mistakes in maybe happening here. So I don't know how best I can capture it. But what I was just very happy about, when I first thought about this lecture, after 2 years, I thought this would be easier to manage, but I realized it's not. Still, it's painful that Chiedu is not here. And secondly, what I realized, okay, we have done the justice for inaugural lecture by having you here. Because not that we have done justice to, I think, Chiedu's memory, but as you said, using this sort of a platform to further and deepen and move ahead, advancing Chiedu's what he really believed for the multilateral trading system and also for the continent. And then also to take it to further, where I think the issues confronting, I think whether it's trade in general in the continent or WTO. And I think you have a sort of a mapped out how we can tackle. I also wanted to really congratulate your role in what you're doing. Yes, maybe it was Chiedu who decided that you should be doing this. I'm very sure, and you all agree that he must be so proud what you are doing. To try to get AfCFTA right, you talked about the potential of the continent, but also the challenges and the capacity and the reality of the continent. So I think it's all about how you try to get it right. You talk about, sometimes it was maybe based on mistakes that you have seen here in the WTO as a WTO delegate, but also what Chiedu said, we all make mistakes. And I think what is important that you confront and try to learn from the mistake, and so that make it better. And also thank you for making, AfCFTA be a best friend of the WTO. I think we much need it here. So, and I hope that this is going to be the continuity, the case. Okay, it's been really very rich. And then, as I said, 2 years after, I thought this would be easier, but I realized it's really not. And then also same with you. And again, we are confronted the fact that Chiedu is not here, but we all have obligation to, I think, drive his legacy, what he believed in. And then I'm sure collectively we can do that. And I hope that this lecture series could be served as a platform and of course to do that. So now there's opportunity to ask questions and make comments. So if anybody in the room wish to make any comment, you are more than welcome. And I also have some online from connecting from different parts of the world also would like to take the floor. I mean, of course, you can say anything about Ambassador Osakwe, but of course, it's also opportunity to ask questions to the Secretary General of the AfCFTA. So yes, okay, maybe let me start from here, Ambassador Kadiri, and then maybe you would like to introduce yourself first. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. May I also remove my mask? I've had 200 COVID tests and all negative, and I'm fully vaccinated. May I avail myself the opportunity to thank the organizers of this event. I am Audu Ayinla Kadiri. I was Nigeria's ambassador to the UN and other international organizations in Geneva until recently, because I had to retire. Not only have I been a Nigerian diplomat along with Chiedu Osakwe, we've been very, very close, and Micah knows this very well. Chiedu was somebody I had known for over 30 years. He was my senior colleague in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Nigerian Diplomatic Service. Then he went to Oxford for the Foreign Service Program. When he graduated, it was I who replaced him at Oxford as a Nigerian student. Then again, he served in Geneva here. At the end of his diplomatic tour of duty, it was I again who came to Geneva to replace him. So we've been quite close. I'm happy to see this event taking place. As has been said from the podium, this event is uncommon. Not only is it uncommon, but it's also in honor of somebody who is also uncommon. From what we've heard about Chiedu, he was a believer in African progress and development. He was a believer in the multilateral trading system when most of us were skeptics, because he served in Geneva and I came to replace him at the time when the international trading system was going through a lot of hiccups. We were then preparing for the WTO Ministerial Conference in Seattle. That was in 1999. And we're also preparing for UNCTAD 11 conference in Bangkok, Thailand. And as is well known by trade negotiators here in Geneva, there's always a tension between the WTO and UNCTAD in terms of agenda. I recall that at that time, we were talking about the development agenda. It first emanated from UNCTAD. It got to a point that the dominant powers, trading powers, global trading powers were asking, can we see a copy of that agenda? We said, no, it's not a document. It's something of the mind. That this time around, developing countries are going to work towards getting a more rewarding trading regime. Chiedu Osakwe has been identified as a believer in the multilateral trading system. I can attest to this because on 2 occasions, one has been mentioned, and I will recall it. Chiedu was the most, sorry, let me call him Chiedu. We're very close. We're like brothers. Yes. So Chiedu, that was during the Seattle Ministerial Conference. I saw how strong his faith was in the multilateral trading system. At a point when we were pursuing a kind of communist agenda, we wanted to see everything shut down. And it happened in Seattle because the negotiations were not going in favor of Africa. And most of the conversations leading to agreements were being taken in the green rooms. So we are not happy with the arrangement. So we were looking forward to everything collapsing. And when it collapsed, and Chiedu came and met us in the African group, he was so bitter. You think he lost his first child. That's you African people, my people, you have embarrassed me. Okay, now you have made the decision fail, but I can assure you that we'll revive it. You know him, you know Chiedu. We will revive it. So he wasn't happy at all. I saw that in him. That shows you the extent to which he believed in that. And again, Ambassador Mene, the Secretary General of AfCFTA, has told us a lot what they've done for Africa in terms of trade negotiations with Chiedu Osakwe. He recalled the issue of the negotiation of the AfCFTA and how Nigeria did not sign. I was still in service then as Nigerian ambassador, and I knew how painful it was. That was the second time I would see Chiedu Osakwe in a very painful mood. Because how could he have chaired the forum that negotiated the agreement and for his country not to sign up? It was to him an embarrassment and a very painful thing to go through. Eventually, the consultations which Ambassador Mene mentioned took place. I think he didn't consult sufficiently. And being very close to him, this was brought to my attention by the key stakeholders, that he didn't consult sufficiently. All he said is, my brother, don't worry, I will consult. And we shall sign that agreement. He was very sure. And we shall sign that agreement. So it happened in Niger Republic, I think Niamey, when he went. Incidentally, I went home to Nigeria for consultations on a different issue, not WTO, of course. I was in charge of WTO. So on my way back, so we met. He was returning from Niamey after the agreement had been signed. So we met at, what do you call it? Airport, Frankfurt, for our connecting flights to Geneva. If you saw the glow in his eyes. You remember, Ambassador Mene, you talked about that iconic photograph. That was the time. So that photograph was just making the rounds on the internet. And again, within we who are friends and colleagues of his, he was so happy. We sat there for about 2 hours waiting for our flight back to Geneva, and he saw how happy he was. But this was somebody who was actually dying. But he had to sacrifice. He was happy that he made that trip to, and we never knew it was his farewell trip. It was his farewell trip. Thereafter, of course, we sat down at home and we discussed, and saw how happy he was that Nigeria eventually signed onto that treaty. So today, I'm happy that we are celebrating a wonderful individual, a very uncommon diplomat, an uncommon trade negotiator. Like Ambassador Mene said, he was 90 years ahead of we African trade negotiators in Geneva, where he was able to see we could not see. So we found it difficult to relate to him. But today, we are all missing him. So I thank you for organizing this, and please convey you and Dr. Okogo, who will see later. Please convey my kind regards to the DG for endorsing this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kadiri. I have a little bit of a dilemma. Secretary General has to leave in the next 7-8 minutes. And I have several people has been raised the floor. So let me, if I may now ask Ambassador Hilal from New York, who has his hands up from the very beginning. So Omar, if you are connected, please go ahead. Good, yes.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Good morning from New York. Thank you very much, dear Micah, for giving me the floor, and especially to give me the floor to speak about a very important personality, a very high-skilled diplomat and very advocate of Africa. I would like also to thank you for initiating this series of lectures on AfCFTA, Africa, and WTO, and especially linking that with the name of a man who was working day and night in high fighting spirit, high motivated spirit to elevate the African interest and also to motivate African diplomats. I have been very lucky to meet him when I arrived there in early 2000, it was in 2001. And he impressed me from the first meeting we had in WTO. He impressed me by his dedication, by his dynamism, and by his vision. And I was positively surprised because I found a man that believes, first of all, in multilateralism, second, in the contribution and the pivotal role of WTO, and third, in African human resources and African future, and African contribution to the trade all around the world. And today, he would be the most happy man in the world when he see that his dream of having an African leading the organization, we have it. And it was one of his objectives, because he believes that Africa suffered justice because she could not have DG. And now that we have it, but the important is that he contribute to mobilize thinking, to push for brainstorming, and also to convince so many Africans about believing in the importance of Africa among the rest of the world. Chiedu was for me a brother. He was for me more than a colleague. He was, I would say that many things I learned about WTO, it was thanks to him, because we have been working because we are very close. Our two families were very close, and we spent all the time dreaming about what we can do to shape African positions and to shape African presence, to make it more visible, more dynamic, and more heard. And whenever we had, before having ministerial meetings, I used to prepare that with him. I have been twice coordinator of the African group, and he was, he was aware and well informed about everything going in Geneva, not only within the African group, but even with the other groups, because he was consulted by all groups, by all the ambassadors. He was listened. He was seen as a wise man who had very realistic vision about the WTO. And whenever WTO had to take a position, if you want to know what's going on, you just knock on the door of Chiedu or take with him coffee or drink or lunch, and you are well informed. He had this capacity of being everywhere and with everybody. He was 1000% African, but he was universal. He was multilateralist. And the accession division, he made of it a very important division, because it opened the window to other countries. He pushed countries and PRs who are not members to think about what they will gain from being a member of WTO. He was the advisor. He was the one who organized meetings. He was the one who organized sometimes even events in his house or in other places, because he believes that WTO can be more efficient by being more universal. And I'm very happy that after him, Micah took the lead also, took the flame and didn't let it off. Now, I would like to say also that Chiedu was a father that was all the time speaking about his family. I used to sit with him, especially on Sunday or Saturday, either in my residence or in his residence, beautiful residence in front of the mountain. And we were talking about our children, about their future, about their school, university, and the need to give them the ambition to be better than us. He wanted to prepare for his family. better future than him, because he wants that his daughter, his children becoming server or becoming leaders in their domain or in their country. He was also a man who gave a lot of importance to friendship. Friendship for him was a style of life. For being his friend is being more than his brother. You can count on him. You can call him anytime. You can ask him any advice, any help, any assistance, even for somebody else. And he was there. He was also a man with commitment to his work. He have been working with WTO for so many years, and he was doing it with high professionalism, high spirits of responsibility, and high commitment with the rest of the governance of the WTO. He was the man that was not involved in any, we understand that in any organization there is competition, he was not the man of competitions. He was man of duty. He was a man of friendship. He was man of honesty. He was man of neutrality in delivering and implementing his duty. So for me, I'm very sad this morning, but in the same time, I'm very happy because we are keeping his mind. I think it's Dr. Onkele who said he's with us. We are lucky missing him, but it's sure that he's with us today, and he's very happy to see us gathered, because he was a man who was united different people from different region and different culture, different languages. And thanks to his spirit, we are today all together. And I hope that this series of lectures will remain and will be institutionalized for the future. I had the chance to meet the new Director General of WTO. She received me despite the fact, in the beginning of her mandate, despite the fact that she was very busy. And I came for New York. As you know, I'm chairing the working group of taxation of Iraq. And I made a request to her. And I hope we can all together work on that, is to give a name of one of the rooms of WTO to Chiedu, like that. His name will be all the time enshrined in the walls and in our the meetings and the rooms of our organization. I think that's the less that the organization can do. But I'm sure that everybody will do what he or she can to make this, beside the lectures, having room for him, because he was an icon of WTO. So my last word is to his family, to tell to his wife and his children, you should be proud of him, as we are proud of being his friend, brother, colleague. We all pray for his soul to rest in peace. And we all pray for his family and especially his children to succeed in their life. Last word will be to you, Micah. Thank you very much for keeping his memory alive, for keeping his legacy also shared, discussed, argued, but very high in our mind, our spirits, but also as a light guiding our work, because he was shining man. He was the best among us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Omar, Ambassador Omar Hilal of Morocco, connecting from New York. You know, Omar, since Ime and Agnès is sitting in front of me, as you are speaking, I can see them nodding and remembering the moment of what you are talking about. Probably now, let me invite Deputy Director General John, and then after this, I'm sorry, I will have to close this lecture, but please feel free to stay afterwards. Thank you. DDG John.
Thank you, Maika, for organizing this important event, and thank you, Ambassador Menon, for your excellent lecture, and thank you, Dr. Bragg, for your warm opening remarks. Like others, I attend this meeting to express our nostalgia of Mr. Chiedu Osakwe. She's a good friend of mine. We knew each other for many years, even before he took the position of director for accession. We worked together on the textile agreement for developing countries. And we benefit a lot from his broad vision and profound knowledge, and also the strong belief of the multilateral trading system. When I served as the ambassador of China from 2017 to 2020, we worked together in many occasions. We went to Paris together for the seminar organized by the French government on WTO reform. We organized the press conference together in Buenos Aires. And we went to Abuja in 2017 for the investment facilitation seminar. We had a good time there. So I tend to agree, someone said, for developing countries, maybe we are economically poor, but we are not intellectually poor, because we have the people like Chiedu Osakwe. I assume if he were here with us, at least he could help us to have good communication with others, to help us to make our voice heard by others. So I think we need to keep his legacy. And as the Deputy Director General for technical assistance capacity building, I think what I can do is to work with the colleagues in the Secretariat to help the developing countries to be fully integrated into the system. And there's still a gap, a huge gap between Africa and the rest of the world. The major gap is the capacity constraint. So we need to mobilize more resources and provide a tailor-made project to assist the developing countries, especially the African countries, to be integrated into the global economy. I think that's the expectation of Mr. Chiedu Osakwe. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, DDG Chan. Only I could invite 3 speakers to speak, but what is sure, I think this platform, I think Chiedu Osakwe Memorial Lecture will bring in, and I can see this will serve as a place where we can really deepen our conversation. Mr. Mele, would you like to say probably last word, since you have heard several remarks from our different colleagues?
Well, thank you very much again, Micah. I think I don't want to cry again in public, so I should not. I should probably not speak anymore about my dear brother. I want to again re-emphasize my appreciation to the DG for initiating this lecture series, and I continue to have my heart out to the Osakwe family. It is still, of course, as you can see, it is still difficult for me, but I think we shall do all that we can in our individual capacities to continue to make sure that his legacy lives on. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So what I can get out, we will continue to use Chiedu as an excuse to have a deeper conversation, but I'm really hoping that from next time, hopefully we will be in the post-COVID environment, that we could do so also with South African wine, and of course, Chiedu's favorite champagne. With this, I would like to close this first memorial lecture. I would really once again thank you so much Mr. Mene, and thank you so much, Dr. Wright. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you.